always good to see most of you, I guess. To see all of you. If you have your Bibles, would you open with me to Luke chapter, that joke kicked in late, Luke chapter 6, starting in verse 30, Luke chapter 6, starting in verse 27, going through verse 36. How many of you guys love to be right? Love to be right. Yeah. How many of you guys love loving people who are really hard to love? Yeah. So in this scripture passage today, Jesus is still preaching his sermon, and so it makes it easier for me to preach the sermon that Jesus preached because I can just read it and it'll preach itself pretty much. So follow along with me in verse 27 of chapter 6, and we'll just read 9 or so verses through, and then we'll dig in. In verse 27, Jesus says, "But I say to you who hear, love your enemies." Great, Jesus, that's easy. Love your who? Your enemies, and do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. To one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from one who takes away your cloak, don't withhold your tunic. Give to everyone who begs from you, and from one who takes away your goods, don't demand them back. And as you wish that others would do to you, so do to them. If you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount. But to love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. And your reward will be great, and you will be sons and daughters of the Most High. For he's kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. So would you pray with me? God, I thank you that you're here with us. I thank you, God, that you brought us all here this morning to worship you, to hear from your word, to be with one another. And Father, we just want to come before you and ask for your Holy Spirit to give us strength to love the people who are tough to love. God, to begin to focus more on people than the problems that they cause. God, you've called us to be a people who are known for being in relationship with people rather than for being right. And so help us, Father, to be a people with humble hearts who, in our marriages, in our families, in our workplaces, to be a people who pursue relationship, even over being right and winning an argument. So help us to love our enemies. We pray these things in your name. Amen. So Jesus starts this passage, and last week we looked at some blessings and some woes, the first part of Jesus' sermon. And he's talking about the people who is in his audience. He's speaking to people who are poor, who are hungry, who are grieving, people who are hurting. And then he says to the people who are rich, who are full, who are well off, he says, woe to you, because you've got everything you need, so you don't think you need me. So Jesus, after giving kind of the epilogue to his sermon, now gets into what it looks like to be a disciple. So he's going to give us one big lesson of what it looks like to be a disciple, and that is that we're people who love. That what sets Christianity, or Christians apart from other people, is our ability to love. Jesus says in John chapter 13 that all people will know that we are his disciples. How? If we love one another. So the big command Jesus gives here, if we're going to follow him, he says to those of you guys who want to hear, those of you guys who are thinking about following me, what it means to be a disciple is that you love, and you love really well, and you love people who are hard to love. And that is something that will set Christianity apart from other religions, Christians apart from other people. So he says, but I say to you who hear, love your enemies. Love your enemies. How many words in English do we use for love? We talk about, man, I love chocolate cake. Man, I love these new shoes. Man, I love my wife. I love you, God. And we use the same word love for a wide variety of things, right? What's neat about the original language that this was written in is that you could have used a couple of different words for love. And the word that Jesus uses here is a word called agape. Everybody say agape.
Agape.
Agape. So there's agape love in Greek. There's eros love in Greek. There's storge love in Greek. There's philos. But the word that Jesus uses here is agape. And agape is an interesting word for love because it is the only word in Greek language that means action. It's a kind of love that means you're going to look out for that other person's highest good. If Jesus would have wanted to speak about love that feels good, that's easy, a kind of love that comes involuntarily, kind of love that you have when we say we fall in love with people, he would have used a different word. If he would have been talking about a kind of love that comes from a mom for her son, he would have used a different word. That's an easy kind of love, right? But Jesus uses here a word that's called agape, and it's a love that's really, really, really hard to have. It's a love that you begin to experience deep into your marriage when life gets tough together. It's a love that, it's kind of an analogy would be a doctor who gives a life-saving surgery for a criminal suspect who comes into the hospital, and yet he doesn't love the person, doesn't have feelings of love for them, but he does the right thing. He seeks their highest good, even for someone who's a criminal. And so this love is a kind of love that looks out for somebody's deepest, highest good. It's uniquely a God-given love. It requires a conquering of the will. It isn't always easy to love, especially people who do us harm or do us evil. It's hard to love, and so it's uniquely a God-given type of love, to look out for somebody's best, even when it's not in your best interest. So Jesus talks about a love that contributes to the beloved's highest good. And this kind of love, it's more about doing good than feeling good. That's a harder kind of love. It's easy to feel good about someone, but it's not always easy to do good for them. So I think this kind of helps me. Jesus doesn't say, hey, I want you to love somebody like you love your enemies like you love your spouse. Is that going to be easy? Jesus says, you're never going to have the kind of feelings for your enemy that you have for someone you kind of deeply love that's close to you. But Jesus says the kind of love I want you to have for them is a doing love, where you do the best thing for them. And that's something that will set us apart. So the first part is, how do we do it? Jesus says, love your enemies, and he's going to give 7 ways in terms of how to love our enemies. So first he says, do good. This is what it looks like to love. He doesn't say feel good about those who hate you. He says, do good to those who hate you. Number 2, bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. To one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And he goes down through this list of ways that we can love our enemies. So when I hear this, I know what Jesus is talking about, but it's difficult to actually put it into practice. I think we all hear this and we think, okay, yeah, I know what that means, I know what that looks like, but then there's this part in my heart that says, no, I don't want to do it. Because they've harmed me, they've messed me up, they've done the wrong thing to me. So I know what it looks like, Jesus, thank you very much, but I don't want to do it. So Jesus says there's 3 active words that he uses here. The first is to do good to those who hate. Then he says, bless those who curse you. And then thirdly, he says, pray for those who abuse you. What do you think the people in the crowd were thinking when Jesus said this? Can you see the people start to walk away? This guy's crazy. And when we begin to hold ourselves to this standard, when we begin to encourage each other to love people like this, it gets kind of hairy. It gets hard because it's not easy and it's counterintuitive. It's countercultural. In our world, we always want to put me as number 1. We always want to put me first. And this is a them first teaching that Jesus gives. And it's what sets Christianity and Christians apart. Do good to those who hate you and bless those who curse you. The word that's used there for bless is, it would be like giving a eulogy at somebody who was your enemy's funeral. Would that be kind of tough? To turn somebody who was your enemy into somebody that you loved and cared for so much that you were the one that actually gave the eulogy at their funeral. It's that word eulogeo, which means to bless. And Jesus goes on to say, so loving isn't only about doing good things to people, but it's about humility and allowing them to harm us and to give back to them. So he says there's 3 other things that we do in humility in verse 29. To one who strikes you on the cheek, what are you to do? Punch him in the face. Is that what it says? Turn the other cheek. And from one who takes away your cloak or your jacket, don't withhold the shirt off your back either. And then he says, give to everyone who begs from you, and from one who takes away from you. Give to everyone who begs from you, and from one who takes away your goods, don't demand them back. And as you wish others would do to you, so do to them. This is a really hard teaching.
Yep.
Part of the reason I struggled making this sermon this week and figuring out what I wanted to speak about is because I have a hard enough time loving people who are easy to love. Loving people who I should be really good at loving, let alone my enemies. And so when I'm speaking to us today, I'm being honest with you that I'm having a hard time even doing this with people who are the closest to me. And so how do we begin to get to this place where we can love those who harm us, who hate us, who curse us? Jesus says in verse 31, as you wish others would do to you, so do to them. And this week as I was preparing the sermon, I had this verse in my head all week long. And oh, the difference it makes when you have this verse reverberating in your head. As you do to others as you wish that they would do to you. And oh, a difference that makes in our life when we begin to see the needs that people have. And we can step into that because we can say, well, if I was in their shoes, I would want them to do this for me. And so we help them. How often do we want to be right? We want to win the argument. Our default position is to go into defense. You ever notice that when you're arguing with someone? Your default position isn't to love them, it's to be right, or it's to defend yourself. And so Jesus says in these first couple of verses, all these first couple of verses talk about giving up being right and loving the person. There's a relationship over rightness. How well does being right work in marriage? Has being right ever helped a relationship?
Yeah, I wouldn't know.
I wouldn't know. Can you ever be right, guys? You can never be right. Yeah. 9 out of 10 fights that happen between Emily and I are started because I wanted to be right. And I was right. Remember when we were in Yellowstone, we were 12 miles up a place called Specimen Ridge, and it was going to be a 12-mile hike back. But I realized that there was a ridge we could go down and cut that down to 6 miles. I said, Emily, I'm right. This is a shortcut. It'll be great. She says, Isaac, it's going to be hellacious going down. Do you see that ridge? It's like that. I said, honey, but it's going to be so much shorter and easier in the long run. Trust me. I'm right. And we started going down the ridge, and we slipped, and we fell, and there was this thick forest in the midst of bear country. And we were walking right through with our 10-year expired bear spray. We made it all the way down, and we got lost and turned around, and it wasn't the right way, Isaac, because I can't be right. I gotta learn that. But how often does being right help us in life? It's so easy to want to win arguments. We as Christians are renowned for being a people who want to be right. We wanted to be right about evolution. We wanted to be right about abortion. We wanted to be right about homosexuality. And those are all important things to be sure that we are in the truth on. But we do not forsake loving people for the sake of being right. And one of the reasons our church is cast off to the side of our society is because people are convinced that people who are here are people who are right rather than people who are loving. And one of the ways that we become right in the eyes of the people around us is by being loving. When we looked at the story of Levi a couple of weeks ago, Levi wasn't wrong, but he was a tax collector. He was sinning. Jesus engaged him. He went to dinner at his house. He loved him. And that's when transformation comes. When Jesus went to Zacchaeus' house, the dude was a sinner. And yet Zacchaeus, after experiencing the grace of Jesus Christ, stands up in front of everyone and says, dude, this day, right now, I'm going to give half of my goods to the poor, and I'm going to repay fourfold if I've messed up, if I've screwed over anyone. I'm going to pay back. So the transformation happens in people's lives after we've extended grace do them, and that's what Jesus encourages us to do. So the whole being right thing is a trap that never actually helps us progress in a relationship with people. Some of us are in a broken relationship with a spouse, a son or daughter or coworker or neighbor because we are right and they know we're right. But the way we went about it wasn't the right way to do it. The goal of Christianity isn't to prove how right we are, but to love those who are in the wrong. What sets us apart as Christians isn't how much we know, it isn't how often we read the Bible, or how often we're in one of these chairs at church, but it's how well we love people who are darn tough to love. And that's how we express the gospel of Jesus Christ. A disciple of Christ is more interested in relationship with people than in being right. Repeat that after me. A disciple of Christ is more interested in relationship than in being right. And that'll make a huge difference in the relationships in our lives, in our families, with our spouses, with the people we go to church with. If we can begin to value people over the problems that they cause. So Jesus starts with what we're to do. We're to love our enemies. And he talks about how we do that. He gives us 7 steps in how we do that. And then he's going to talk about who are these enemies in verse 32. Who are these people who we're supposed to love? In verse 32, Jesus says, if you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. That's the first group of people we're supposed to love. Jesus says, go beyond loving people who are easy to love. Love people who are tough to love. It's our neighbor who's always complaining about the dog in their yard, or the neighbor that's always complaining about our fruit tree hanging over the fence. Whatever it is, they'll find any reason to complain. Jesus says, those are the kind of folks who we are to love. Verse 33 says, verse 33. If you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. Who are we supposed to love? People who treat us poorly. People who don't do good to us. We're supposed to do good to them. And that says, if you lend in verse 34, to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount. So we love those who don't like us, we love those who treat us poorly, and we love those who can never repay our kindness. So what kind of reward do we get from that? In my mind, I'm always the kind of person that wants to invest in things that I know I'll get something, I'll get a return on, right? So I engage. One of the things I'll do is maybe I'll do the dishes so that Emily can make a really good cobbler later, because I did some nice things around the house. Maybe she'll do something nice back. Have you ever done that?
Amen.
We're all about loving to see what we can get in return. So what that means is that we're going to love people who can love us back. And we're going to lend to people who can give us some interest back. Or we're going to do good to people who do good to us. That's what we do in business strategies. We'll give gifts to other businesses so that they'll return the gift back to us. And so there's this reciprocal relationship we have where we think, I'm going to do good to them because they did good to me. And Jesus says, wait a second, how does that make you any different than a sinner? That's what sinners do. They say, they did good to me, so I'll do good to them. What sets us apart as Christians is we do good to people who have never done good to us. And we lend to those who can never repay us. And we love those who can never love us the way that we love them. The goal here is to look different from the world in the types of people we extend love to. It's normal to love those who love us. It's grace to do good to those who do evil to you. 3 times in this passage, the word benefit or credit is used. You see that word over and over again in verse 32. If you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? And in verse 33, if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? And down in verse 34, if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Luke repeats that same word grace in the Greek. It's grace, charis, grace, over and over again. Luke says what sets us apart as Christians is our ability to extend love to people who didn't earn it, who don't expect it. That's grace. So he says, what benefit is that to you? Meaning, how is that grace to to you, when you love people who love you, when you do good to those who do good to you. So when Jesus loves us, in spite of our hostilities to him, he's extending grace to us. So that's what grace is. Grace is unearned extension of love to people who don't expect it. That's what Jesus does for us. Unearned extension of love to people who haven't expected it. A disciple of Christ loves people who haven't earned our love. Repeat that after me. A disciple of Christ, loves people who haven't earned our love.
Loves people who haven't earned our love.
Yeah, so that's what will make us look different in our world. If we can be a people who step out in love for people who definitely don't deserve it or definitely haven't earned it, then we'll look different than the world around us. So that's the who, and then Jesus gets into the why. Why love our enemies? What's the purpose of loving our enemies? So in Luke chapter 6, verse 35, Jesus gets into that. He says, "But love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great. And you will be sons of the Most High, for he's kind to the who? To the ungrateful and the evil. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful." So why love our enemies? What kind of reward are we going to get from people if we turn our cheek and they hit us? We turn the other cheek and they hit us again. What kind of reward are we going to get from people if we lend to people who can never pay us back? What kind of reward are we going to get if we allow people to step over us and to hurt us and we don't fight back? We'll get no reward from the world. So what's awesome is that God says, actually, I see that. God says, I see what you're doing. And your love that you express to your enemies is actually love that you're expressing to me. Remember that passage in Matthew chapter 25? Where Jesus lines up everybody on his left and on his right at the very end of time. And he says, "Come, all you who are, come to me to live basically an eternal life." Why? Because you saw me when I was hungry, and you did what? You fed me. You saw me when I was thirsty, and you did what? When I was naked, and you clothed me. When I was sick, and you visited me. When I was in prison, and you came and saw me. And all these people said, "Jesus, why did we ever see you sick or hungry or thirsty?" And Jesus said, "No, whenever you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to who? To me." And so one of the reasons we can go on living and loving our enemies is because when we do that, we're actually sending that love to God, to Jesus, through our enemies. And so he sees that and he rewards us for that. We may get no reward, and our relationships may never improve, and our life on earth may never get better by loving our enemies. In fact, Jesus says that it might get worse by living out this ethic in our world. But he promises as a just God that he sees us and that he will reward us even when the world doesn't. So the first reason we love our enemies is because God rewards our love. And secondly, it's because we might become like Jesus. We love our enemies so that we might be like Jesus. Do you see what it says there? Love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great. And you will be what? Children of the Most High. For he is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. People say that I'm a chip off the old block sometimes because I preach like my pops, or because I like to go outside like my dad did, or because I like to go hunting or fishing, or because I have some of the same smells that my dad did. I'm a chip off the old block. And one of the goals that Jesus has for us is that we might reflect God by the way that we live, that we might look like our pops in the way that we love people, because Jesus, did he do a very good job of loving his enemies? Yeah. Were there times in his life when it was challenging to love people? There's an exact reflection of this passage in Jesus' passion scene. When he was led before Herod and they brought 600 people around Jesus and they started mocking him. And they took a crown of thorns and they put it on his head, and it says that they beat him with a rod to drive that thorn crown into his head. They mocked him. And yet Jesus, when he climbed up on the cross, he said, "Father, condemn them, for they know exactly what they're doing." Is that what Jesus said? "Oh, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." So when we begin to ask the question, what does it look like to be sons and daughters of God? How do we become that? In one sense, it means that we begin to look more and more like Jesus. So in 2 Corinthians, if you have your Bibles, turn with me to 2 Corinthians. This is the ultimate goal for us as disciples of Jesus. 2 Corinthians chapter 3. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Acts, Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18. So what's the goal of a disciple? What do you guys think? What is the goal of being a disciple of Jesus? To love everybody, to reflect Jesus. What else?
Spread the word.
Spread the word. To make disciples. Now, all those things that you guys just mentioned are reflections of who Jesus was. And so 2 Corinthians chapter 3, 18 sums it up really well. It says, "And we all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being" what? Transformed into the same image. And that image is Christ, mentioned here and elsewhere in Scripture. Into the same image, from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. So day in and day out, we're being transformed to look more and more, to live more and more, to love more and more like Christ. That's the goal as Christians, is to become like Christ. So if we look back in our lives and we say, where was I a year ago, or 10 years ago, or 15 years ago? Have you ever seen somebody who's been married for a really, really, really long time? Do they begin to look similar sometimes? Have you ever noticed that?
You look alike.
And so the longer we follow Jesus, and Amy, I hope that doesn't happen to you. You'll lose that beautiful head. As we begin to follow Jesus for a long, long time, we begin to look more like him. And Jesus, did he ever love his enemies? I think of that beautiful story in John 8, one of my favorite stories in the whole Bible. And I think about that time when Jesus was teaching in the temple, early in the morning while it was still dark. And all of a sudden, as Jesus was preaching in the temple and there was a crowd of his disciples around him, do you remember what happened? There was this crowd that came in, and they were grabbing, they had in tow this woman that they had caught in the act of what? Adultery. And this crowd brought this woman before Jesus and before all of the disciples. And so how embarrassed are you if you're this woman? And it says that they throw her before Jesus. And if you're caught in the act of adultery, what do you look like? What are you wearing? And so they bring her before Jesus and throw her before Jesus. And you can imagine them saying to her, "We're bringing you to Jesus. We're bringing you to the teacher." And in your mind, if you're this lady, what are you thinking if you're going to be brought to Jesus? The holiest one? The guy who made that command way back in Exodus chapter 20, "You shall not commit adultery." And here you are before the one whose finger carved that into the stone. And she is brought before Jesus, and the Pharisees are thinking, "We're in the right. We're right." Because in the Old Testament it says, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." And we're right. And so they bring her before Jesus and they say, "Jesus, it says in the Old Testament that such women as these should be stoned." Isn't that funny how people who are right, Pharisees, they always label people. Women such as this. She is a woman such as this. And Jesus, in the presence of his enemies, here is a woman who has failed to obey his law. Romans chapter 8 says that those who do not obey God's law are hostile to God. And they cannot please God if they don't obey God's law. And so this woman has disobeyed God's law. She's an enemy of God. And she comes before Jesus. And what does Jesus do when she's brought before him? You remember?
Writes in the
How angry does Jesus get at this woman?
He doesn't say anything.
He gets down on his knees, right? And he takes his finger, and maybe in the dust of that temple, he begins to write something on the ground there. And the people, the Pharisees, are looking at what Jesus is writing. And it says that one by one, they begin to leave, the oldest to the youngest. Jesus has stood up and he said, let those of you, let the one without sin be the first to throw a stone. And Jesus says, hey, I know that you guys think you're right, but when you're standing before the Holy One of God, no one is right. That all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And one of the things that Isaac has to learn when I want to be right with my spouse, when I want to be right with my friends who I think have done me wrong, when I want to be right at church, is that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. No one is right before a perfectly good and holy God. So Romans chapter 5 verse 10 says that while we were enemies of God, Jesus reconciled us to the Father. Turn with me to Romans chapter 5. Romans chapter 5 verse 10. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans. Romans chapter 5 verse 10. For while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of His Son. Much more, now that we are reconciled, shall we be saved by His life. More than that, we also rejoice in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have now received reconciliation. So all of us were at one time what?
sinners.
Enemies of God. And so when this woman is carried before Jesus and he gets down on his knees and he writes in the dust and he gets up, some people think that Jesus was writing the sins of those Pharisees in the dust. Would that have been pretty embarrassing? And one by one, they begin to leave, the oldest to the youngest, until Jesus is left alone with this woman. And it says that as she's standing before him, before the judge of all the world, Jesus says, look around. Do you see her look around? He says, where are your accusers? Where are those who would condemn you? And she says, they're gone, Lord. He says, neither do I condemn you, but go and sin no more. Jesus doesn't minimize the sin, but he emphasizes, he maximizes his love for the sinner. And it's that grace that leads to transformation in her life. So Jesus was really good at loving his enemies. And so when he says that we should do good and love those and lend to those who can't repay us so that we might become sons and daughters of God, it means that we begin to live like Jesus. Even for those people who we think are in the wrong. We got to love them, and that's how we lead them into the truth of Jesus Christ. There's that other story in Acts chapter 9. Remember that dude named Saul who thought he was really, really, really right? He was a persecutor of the church, and for anybody who was a Christian, he would go out and find them, and he would go out and lead them into prison to try to get them executed. So he was a righteous, zealous Jew. And he was going to a town called Damascus to go and round up anybody who was a part of the way, those who were Christians. And as he was about to drop down into Damascus, do you remember what happened on top of that hill? As Saul was riding on his horse, all of a sudden there was this great light that flashed out of heaven, and he fell off his horse onto his face, and he was eating dust. And there was this voice that came out of heaven. He said, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting my people? Why are you persecuting Christians? Why are you persecuting me? And Saul said, who are you, Lord? And Jesus said, yep. And Jesus gave Saul an awesome chance to turn his life around. And he used Saul to become the major evangelizer, life-saver, rescuer of the Gentile people. And Saul, who spent all his life being right, realized that maybe he wasn't. And God extended grace to even a murderer like him, and it transformed his life. When I think about the story of the woman who was caught in adultery or Saul, I see in those stories my own life. That I should be drugged before Jesus for all the things that I've done. And that I'm not right before Jesus any more than any one of us. I'm not wrong any more than any one of us is. We all come before Jesus needy for His forgiveness, for His grace. And it's when I begin to remember that, when my neighbor comes over and says, dude, your chicken is in my lawn again, can you get it off? That I can begin to love them, even in spite of how annoying they might be to me. It's when I remember that I am that woman who has sinned before God, that I'm Saul and I think I'm right, but maybe I'm actually wrong, that I can begin to love like Jesus has bid us to. And that's the question for us today. It starts with us. Do we remember that we were once enemies of God? And that because of the grace, the unexpected, the unearned love of God extended to us, that we became reconciled to Him while we were still His enemies? That's where it starts. And out of that grace, out of that outpouring of love, then we enter into the lives of people around us who are tough to love. And we can do it well because we remember that we were once tough to love to God. And even on a daily basis, I think I'm still pretty tough to love for God. So I want to ask the question today, who are the hated in our lives? That's what enemy means here. It means hated. Who are the people in our lives that we just cannot stand? And maybe for very good reasons. Because they hurt us. And it's a part in our heart that's still full of bitterness and resentment and hatred. Remember when I was in high school, I did an awful lot of pretty terrible things to my mom and dad. I would lie to them all the time. I'd sneak out. I would hurt them in a variety of ways. And I remember that despite all that hatred that I had for them, my dad always placed relationship over reputation. He was a pastor in that town. And everybody knew who that boy Isaac was. And yet he didn't punish me like he should have. He didn't do the things that he should have done as a just dad, as the pastor of this church. He just kept loving me. And he put relationship over his own reputation. And some of us are sitting here broken over the relationship of a son or daughter because our reputation comes first, because we got to be right. My dad put relationship over rightness. He was right, I was wrong, but he still valued his son over being right. Maybe it's a call to have relationship over resentment in our lives. Know the difference it can make if we say, Jesus, I saw the way that you loved me while I was still your enemy, and so right now in my life, this person is giving me a really tough time, I'm going to extend your love to them as well. Who are the people that we find it really easy to hate in our lives? I'm going to ask for a time right now as we enter into the last songs, as we give an invitation for you to consider in your own minds, who is it that we find really difficult to love, and how can we extend a text or a phone call, or just to continue to pray to God that He might open our hearts to be able to give forgiveness in that area. Who are those who hate us in our lives? Who are those who hate us in our lives that we might have a chance to extend love to? When my dad was going through his time with his cancer, I found it really easy to be upset with God. Anybody else ever been there? I found it really easy to hate God because of what He was doing. And I prayed and I prayed and I prayed for my pop's healing, and did it happen? Not in the way I expected it to. And I began to be angry with God. And one of the questions I've got for us today is, have we gotten over a grudge against God yet? Maybe He's our enemy. And it's time for us to begin to look at God through the eyes of Jesus Christ. When we read the Scriptures, when we read the Gospels, do you see how awesome Jesus' love is for us? We know that Jesus is Himself God. Maybe it's time to take a new look at Jesus because of His incredible grace that He's extended to us. So I want to ask, as the worship team comes forward today, I want to ask if you guys would be willing, you guys can come on up and start playing. I want you guys maybe just to play one song, and during this first song as you guys play, it'll be a little different today, but I want us to enter into a time of prayer for our enemies. So as they sing, maybe just in the background or something like that, I want us to maybe turn to a neighbor, and this is going to be hard, but we're a church, and I want us to not share a name, but just to ask for strength for someone in our life who we're having a really hard time loving. Or someone in our life who has a really hard time loving us. We want to ask that maybe God would fill our hearts with enough grace to extend love to them. So as we sing this first song, that's what I want us to do. Whether that's taking a moment with yourself and saying, God, I need your help for some grace for this person in my life. Maybe it means turning to your neighbor and saying, I need help with this person in my life. Would you help me with that? And at the end of that time, I want to ask, maybe today you guys haven't become a part of a community where you feel comfortable doing that. Maybe you guys aren't a part of this church family yet, so I'm going to give an invitation to say, if you guys haven't joined a church family, would you like to do so today? And I know that there's already 2 people that have made that decision. And I'm going to ask as well, if you haven't yet been baptized or offered your life to Jesus, would you like to do that today? So it's just a time of invitation or a decision to say, where am I in my walk with Christ, and how can I move forward with that? And at the end of all that, we'll get a chance to take our communion and offering.